Today we're going to take a note from the lesser known version of the Beatitudes. These attitudes invite us to measure our lives by God's abundance and not our own. I remember a number of years ago, in fact, it was 16, almost 17 years ago, when my very good friend Michael was leaving the area and he was moving to New York. He was going to serve in a small parish in Arkport, tiny United Methodist community, and a tiny town, relatively small town. I don't want to say tiny, maybe there's some Arkportians watching. I don't want them to feel like I'm dissing their town. But as he was moving, one of the books he gave me he had two in his collection, and one was called Self-Sufficiency. And it was about all the things you can do on just an acre of land to be completely self-sufficient and have no need for anyone else. Everything from composting to, getting seeds from all the things you plant, rotating the plants around your 1 acre of land, ways to heat your house, ways to compost your excrement, everything. It was in there. It was all about self-sufficiency. It was a really interesting book. It's still in my nightstand, in my night table. I haven't read it in a really long time. I like the idea of self-sufficiency. But the idea that we could ever be self-sufficient without the need of one another is a falsehood. It's a lie. We need one another. And whenever we forget that, whenever we forget how interdependent, interconnected, interrelated we all are to one another beyond our race and religion and continent and nationality, all those kinds of things, when we forget our interrelatedness, we start to treat each other, ourselves, and God as if they're sort of superfluous. And that's a danger Jesus was concerned about. It's a danger. So he offers these words that we're about to read together as a warning. Now I just want to set the scene for you. This is the chapter 6 of the Gospel of Luke. We could have begun at the beginning of chapter 6 if we'd wanted to in the reading. I want to set the scene for you just a little bit. This is on a plain. But Jesus has been up on the mountain. We're told he was communing with God, praying, that he was connecting with God up on the mountain. The first thing he does when he comes down off the mountain is he picks the 12, picks the disciples. That's his first thing. Very first thing, okay, been talking to God. I know which ones of you are going to be the 12. Picks them. Right then and there when he comes down. And then he starts to teach. And he's teaching those who really want to follow him. So there was a large crowd of people who had come to hear him. And they knew how powerful he was. They wanted to get close to him because the power, it says, was flowing off of him. Looking at his disciples, Jesus said, now, this is a very important cue. Beginning in verse 20, looking at the disciples, Jesus said. Jesus didn't say this to the crowd. What he's about to say, he is saying to those who purport to follow him. So if we purport to follow him, we need to listen to these words. Followers, disciples, people who study under Jesus are seeking to be more like him. And here are the words he said. You who are poor are blessed, for the reign of God is yours. You who hunger now are blessed, for you'll be filled. You who weep now are blessed, for you'll laugh. You are blessed when people hate you, when they scorn you and insult you and spurn you, your name as evil because of the chosen one. On the day they do so, rejoice and be glad. Your reward will be great in heaven, for their ancestors treated the prophets the very same way. But woe to you rich, for you are now receiving your comfort in full. Woe to you who are full, for you'll go hungry. Woe to you who laugh now, for you'll weep in your grief. Woe to you when all speak well of you, for their ancestors treated the false prophets the same way. To you who hear me, I say, love your enemies, do good for those who hate you, bless those who curse you, and pray for those who mistreat you. This is the gospel of the Lord for this morning. Praise be to God. Well, I've heard a number of sermons in my life, not that many, about the Sermon on the Plain. Because the Sermon on the Mount's got a whole bunch of good stuff in it, and it's 3 whole chapters, 5, 6, and 7 of the Gospel of Matthew. The Sermon on the Plain is kind of short. It's sweet, it's to the point. Luke doesn't seem to feel the need to have all of the teachings gathered in one place. This happens over a shorter period of time and to a more direct group of people. Now, some scholars have tried to conflate the two and say that, Luke got it wrong, it was really on the Mount and all. I mean, let's just set it aside for a moment and say, I've been preaching for 33 years. Jesus was only preached for about 3. But let me just tell you something. If you've heard me preach for 33 years, most of you, that's not true. But if you have heard me preach for 33 years, there's probably going to be some common themes that come back up over time. I might not say the exact same thing I did 30 years ago. I hope not. I've grown a little, I've changed a little. The crowd's different than it was when I first came here 33 years ago, 32 and a half years ago. It was about 33 years ago that I found out where I was going. Got a call from Doug Dillard who said, "We've got an opportunity for you, James." And I was like, okay, lay it on me, brother. Of course, I didn't say it like that because, I was young and scared, and, Doug Dillard was a big name in the Virginia Annual Conference. And he said, "You're going to St. James." And I said, "You're kidding me." Something has we share a name? Yes, you're going there. So there you go. But in those 33 years of talking about God, and I had experience before that. I'd been under appointment. Now it's coming up on 38 years under appointment and 39 years of church-related work. So when I talk about God, some of those themes are going to appear several times. So it all depends on who I'm talking to. In the Gospel of Luke, Jesus has just picked his disciples, and he needs them to know that they're not self-sufficient. They don't float all by themselves. They're not alone. They are together. They're a team. And they're not just a team with each other, they're a team with God. And God needs us all at our best. So he begins by telling, about some attitudes that are, what's interesting is the word in Greek is blessed. It could be translated happy. I mean, there's a number of ways. But in Aramaic, it probably meant more something like ripe and ready to be picked. You're really ripe, not ripe like that's, stenchy. Some people, you come into a room, you say, "Woohoo, this is ripe." No, not like that. I'm talking about ripe. When you bite into a fresh piece of fruit and it's really ripe? For me, I remember I was in Ghana. I was visiting. I was about to, we'd had been part of a big conference. The folks from the United States had gone to Ghana because they were having a big evangelism conference, and we wanted to learn because the church in Africa is still growing like wildfire. It is just all over the place, and it keeps getting bigger. So we wanted to learn from them. This was even in the 80s, it was like that. The church in America was starting to shrink. It wasn't like on a crash dive like it is these days, but it was starting to shrink, and we wanted to learn. So we went. But then as a part of it, all of us who came to the conference were sent out. People from Western Africa and from the United States were all sent out to preach in churches for 3 weeks. I went to Asamankasi. And in any case, on our way out, the district superintendent, who was the one I was riding with, stopped at the side of the road, and we got a fresh pineapple. And right at the side of the road, took the guy who was selling the pineapples took out a machete and just chopped it open. Right there, held it in his hand. I was like, I would have already cut my arm off. But, if you've been doing this for a while, I guess you know what you're doing. And he handed it to me. I had never before and never since tasted a pineapple that tasted like that pineapple. Fresh, right off the bush tree, whatever exactly. Sort of a cross between the two. If you look at a pineapple palm looking tree, but man, it was unbelievable. When something is ripe and fresh, it is just right. The word that we have always translated, and in Greek it's a good way to translate it, but Jesus would have probably spoken Aramaic. And in Aramaic, the word is a much richer, it may have meant happy. It could mean good. It could mean blessed, but it could also mean ripe. You're really ripe when you're poor. When you absolutely know that nothing you have measures up to the abundance of God. Nothing you have measures up to who God is. When you recognize that no matter how little everyone else measures you by, and we label people as poor. It's a way of distancing ourselves. Well, those are poor people. But if you recognize how poor you are, you already understand the reign of God. If you recognize everything you have is a gift, every breath, every moment of your life is a connected piece to God, then you already understand what the reign of God looks like, what this kingdom of God looks like. You're already a part of it because you recognize it's not your abundance. It's no matter how much you have in the bank, it's not your abundance. It's God's. So when you recognize how poor you already are, you're starting to get it. All that I have, this body of mine, everything, the gift that it is. Wow. Blessed are you who are hungry now. Now this seems like I've been hungry before. It's been a long time since I've been really hungry, you can tell. It's been a long time since I've been really, really hungry. But to recognize when I need to stop. It's okay to be a little bit hungry. It's one of the things that they taught me. The very first thing when I did Weight Watchers in 2001, that's when I was going to Mozambique. Later in the 2001, 2002, I was going to Mozambique with a group from the Virginia Annual Conference. And I went to Weight Watchers, and they said, listen, if you feel a little bit hungry, it's not a signal to go and eat. You have to kind of say, it's okay to feel a little bit hungry. It's okay to have a little bit of hungry. So blessed are you if you feel the hunger, and yet you recognize that you can never fill the hunger with just food. You'll be satisfied, knowing that your hunger will never be fully satisfied by food. I'll be the first to tell you, when I start to get stressed, I will go in the kitchen when I don't need to eat anything, and I will look through the cabinets. Linda will be down, we'll be watching a program together. I'll get up and I'll go into the kitchen. Linda will say, what are you doing up there? I suspect she knows. She doesn't get up off the couch and come up and look in there and see what I'm doing. But I've opened the refrigerator, I've looked at everything in there, what's in here. No, nothing. The refrigerator is full, but there's nothing in there. So I close those doors. So I go to the cabinet, the same cabinet I open every single day. What's in the cabinet? Nothing. Cabinet is full. There's plenty of food in there, but it's not meeting. I'm eating my nerves. I'm learned to anesthetize myself. We all have our substances in life, whatever they happen to be, and I anesthetize myself with those things sometimes, calm myself down. Blessed are you if you are hungry and you recognize that the bread of life is more than just enough food to eat. That you will never be satisfied no matter how much you eat physically. When you recognize that, blessed are you who are hungry, you'll be satisfied. Because the satisfaction will come from something more than what you eat. The last of those blesseds points yet again to something important in our lives. Blessed are you who weep. You who weep now are blessed, because someday you'll be able to laugh. Now, it's for me like the second beatitude in Matthew. What does it mean, blessed are you who mourn, for you'll be comforted? What am I mourning for? What is that dissatisfaction that I'm feeling? What is that sadness, that overwhelming sense of loss that I have that I don't have? What am I missing? What am I missing? Grief is a reality for all of us. It's something that we will all experience in life. The grief of someone we love who has died. The grief when we're trying to figure out our meaning, when we're transitioning from one job to another, or losing a job, or retiring even. What am I going to do with myself? For I've been defined by work all of my life. I've done this thing. What am I going to be now? We've all mourned over something, grieved over something in our lives, which means that something had meaning enough in our lives for us to miss it. And it's an opportunity to reflect. If we grieve, if we mourn, if we're wondering about the meaning of our lives without X, Y, or Z, without that relationship, without that work, without that sense of purpose or meaning, we'll become satisfied when we realize that as long as we're in that flow with God, we have found that meaning. Now then, Jesus turns around and flips the tables. He does that several times. Sometimes it's literally, and sometimes it's metaphorically or in language. You've heard it said. And so then he starts saying to you, whoever the yous are that are listening, that includes me, woe to you if you're rich. And you think that's all that it takes, because that big bank account is not going to give you fulfillment. You think it is, and you think, well, it's pretty full, but it's not full enough. Have you ever noticed no matter how much you have, not quite, there's always room for more. There's always a little bit more space, and we think that's going to fulfill us. No matter how much we have, that is not self-sufficiency, because that's the unripeness. That's the opposite of ripeness. When we start to rely completely on ourselves because I got all I need. It's like the guy who built the barn, one of the wonderful parables Jesus tells. When you think you've got all you need and you don't even need God, you've missed out. You've begun to think you're enough. And I want you to know that from a mental perspective and from a spiritual perspective, God made you to be enough, just as you are. But you're not enough by yourself. You're a part of God's bigger movement in this universe. And we need to rely on that sense of connection. Woe to you who are satiated, who are so full you don't know what to do. Because then you don't have room for the hunger for something more. The hunger that needs to be bigger than the food we eat. It's a hunger for a sense of direction, a purpose, of belonging, of being connected to God in our lives. There is, as Augustine would tell us, a God-shaped hole in our lives that only can be filled by God. It cannot be filled by anything else. None of the other pursuits in our lives will ever fill that hole. We can try, but if we've become so satiated by life that we've missed out on the chance to hunger after God in our lives, and if we're so busy finding joy and avoiding any pain in our lives, the people who laugh now, because that's it. You've already received it. You've missed out. You've missed out on the fullness of life. If you can laugh at everything in life, you've missed out on the things that you love enough to miss when they're gone. On the people to love enough to miss when they're gone. We live in an entertainment culture. Jesus did too. Not so much in the Middle East as in Rome and anywhere in the Roman Empire. It was all about distracting the populace. That's what the Colosseums were about. Let's get, as much spectacle as possible. Let's keep them distracted from how bad things the rest of their life are. Let's just entertain ourselves. I do not know how many channels I currently have available to me, but there are way too many on my television set. On my television set right now, just the basic package is way more than I could ever want to consume and know about in my life. Way more than all of that. And that's a challenge. I need to be entertained and distracted so much that I cannot be engaged. And those who laugh all the time miss out on what all the pieces are, that kind of entertainment. I'm not saying entertainment is bad. Be entertained periodically. But you miss out on life and engagement with the world if all you're doing is distracting yourself from the pain and misery all around, from those who are struggling. Because part of our call is to enter into that, to recognize there is an abundance, but it's not my abundance that matters, it's God's abundance. And if I have more than I need, that means somebody else has less than they do. And I've got to find a way to meet their needs too. Because as long as one person is suffering, I can never truly be happy. As long as one person is being discriminated against, I cannot be happy in whatever privilege I find myself living. Jesus is telling us that this is important. Don't ever think that you're an island all by yourself. We are a part of a larger world, a larger humanity, and a larger kingdom. And we need to rely on God's presence to make it there, to see it. I want to challenge you, encourage you this week to pick up Luke. You can read the whole thing if you want to, but I encourage you to pick up chapter 6 and begin in verse 20 and just read what Jesus says on that Sermon on the Plain. And try to see in the words that he uses something more than just physical hunger or the lack of money in your bank account or those kinds of things. Because those are the things, he tells us what it means to be ripe and also what it looks like to be unripe. And so think of those this week. Is this thing that I'm doing ripe to make a difference in the world, or is it unripe because it's all about me? Jesus invites us to ask those questions of ourselves in this Sermon on the Plain. Linda will share a reflection with us.